I want to talk about testing psychics. This is something we spent quite a lot of time on at the MSS since we started in 2009. And really, it kind of goes back to, we're fascinated by the idea that there are people out there who say they're talking to the dead, because either it's true and it's therefore very exciting, or it's not true and it's therefore quite troublesome. And it's surprising how much of this stuff is actually around you. So if anyone's ever been past this building here, have you? I've been into it as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. So you go in, it's the Liverpool Spiritualist Church, if anyone hasn't been there or doesn't know too much about it. Spiritualism as a religion is based on the notion essentially that psychics are able to talk to the dead, and therefore the dead must be somewhere, and therefore there must be an afterlife and all that kind of stuff, because those psychics have to be talking to the dead, so those dead have got to be somewhere. Which means you go into a spiritualist church and in effect you get a psychic show, the likes of which you'd get from Derek Acora or Sally Morgan or any of the big touring psychics. But you get it for about £3 worth of donation, and it's really fascinating to go along. And the fascinating thing about the spiritualist religion is it's not actually that old. I think it was invented in about 1833, something around that area. And it was off the back of two sisters called the Fox sisters, who basically invented seances. There were two girls in America who were doing the classic knock once for yes and twice for no, and they were asking questions of the dead, and the dead were making these knocking sounds, and this convinced everybody that they were genuinely talking to the dead. When in actual fact what was happening was these girls were clicking bones in their toes and making clicking noises that way, and essentially hoaxing the entire thing. And later in their life, they came out and said, actually, yes, we were faking this entire thing. But by this point, spiritualism as a religion had caught on, and other people were claiming to be talking to the dead and running spiritualist churches all around America, and it spread to England too. And even Arthur Conan Doyle is a big figure in spiritualism, because he really believed in this stuff after losing his son. So it surprised me when we started at the MSS and started looking around for psychic claims, just how much of this stuff was around. And we found, this building here. And it always, whenever I talk about psychics, people always say the same kinds of things of what's the harm, really. And this is a screen grab I took from an undercover investigation I did of some palm readers in Blackpool, where I went in to have my palm read with wearing an undercover camera. And as you can see here, one of the harms is pretty clear in that this is the price list. And for one palm reading, she was going to charge £100, which is quite a lot of money. In fact, I only paid £30 for the reading that I got as an undercover investigator. And for that £30, I got about a 4.5-minute reading. And she said nothing of any connection to my life. She was saying very generic stuff, asking me more questions than I answered, and really not providing any insight into my life. For £30, it's quite a lot of money. But the money alone isn't the only harm that's possible from psychics, I think. There are other elements of psychic abilities and psychic claims that can be very harmful if they're not genuine. You're talking to people who are grieving, often they've lost someone that they've loved, and you're interfering with that grief process. But if you're genuinely speaking to the dead, then maybe you're providing a legitimate service. If you aren't genuinely speaking to the dead, then that interruption of the grief process can be very damaging to people. And there are plenty of examples of where psychics get involved in things that are quite troublesome. Here's one particular example from a Liverpool-based psychic called Joe Power. You probably recognise this particular case here, Shannon Matthews. She was a girl that went missing from Wakefield, and Joe Power, as a psychic, rushed to her mother's side and said he could figure out where the child was, and that she was abducted from she was up in a village a few miles north of Wakefield. She was abducted by a guy in a blue van. He spent the entire day with her mother. At no point did he realise that her mother was part of her abduction. She was aware of exactly where that child was. She wasn't abducted by a guy in a blue van. It was her mother and this creepy uncle figure. And the whole time, the mother was fully aware of where her child was. So here, we have a psychic getting involved in a missing persons case and providing absolutely no insight. And this happens quite a lot. There's never been a documented case where any psychic who's gone to the police with any so-called information has provided anything that could suggest that they were getting legitimate information. And Joe Power's done this with many different cases. And he's involved himself in the Madeline McCann missing case and various others. And largely, if you ask me, it's to promote his books and his tour and his various other bits and bobs. And it's not really because he has a genuine ability to offer the police anything that they can't get from their normal police means. So once psychics are getting involved in missing person cases, this can be a very harmful and damaging thing. It wastes huge amounts of police time, it gets huge amounts of hope up with the parents, and inevitably, if you don't actually have any insight and you're just guessing, it's very unlikely that you're going to come to any useful information that way. And then you have people like this, who's a very, very famous psychic from America in the 80s, a guy called Peter Popov, who was a faith healer, making literally millions of pounds even now. So he was exposed in the 1980s as being a fraud and a cheat. He was using an earpiece in order to pretend to be psychic. He was having his wife just reading about information from pieces of paper about the audiences who were there, and then relaying that to the audience as if it was coming from God, and it was really just coming from his wife and an earpiece. And he was hugely exposed and completely bankrupted in America. And yet he's still around, and this actually is a shot, you can't quite see it, is that a touch screen? Okay, didn't realise that. That's a shot from an undercover investigation I did into Peter Popov, where I went along to his meeting in London, and he was touching people and claiming to cure their cancer, claiming to cure AIDS, claiming to cure all sorts of things, and he made a huge amount of money on that day alone. We know that he's making millions of pounds out of these claims to be able to cure people and connect with God and other kind of things like that, when he's been proven in the past to be fraudulent. So here's a guy who's using his ability, or who's claiming to have these abilities, and we know he doesn't, and he's conning people. And then you have people like Sally Morgan. I'm sure people have heard of Sally Morgan, the UK's biggest touring medium, makes millions of pounds a year out of the many thousands of people that she sees on an annual basis. Something like 40 or 50 shows a year, 1,000 people in the audience, 20, 30 pounds a head. If what she's doing is genuine, then fine, but if it isn't genuine, then that's an awful lot of money to be making out of something you can't actually do. And so this is why, really, we think, rather than saying these people are all cons and frauds and things like that, we just say, well, if you're making the claim that you're able to talk to the dead, just show us that you're doing it. Just prove that you're able to do this in a way that a magician couldn't do it. You know, if you can do something that Derren Brown can't do, then maybe there's something interesting here. And if there is something interesting there, then we're open-minded to it. But first we need some kind of proof, some kind of evidence that anybody anywhere is able to do these things. And this is why, as skeptics, we occasionally will actually test people who say they've got psychic abilities. And this is something I did in, I think it was 2012. We did the Halloween Psychic Challenge. There's myself there with Simon Singh, the science writer, and Chris French, the psychologist from Goldsmith University. And we put a call out in the media to say, is there anybody out there who thinks they've got psychic ability, who'd be willing to put their abilities to the test, to see if we can figure out whether there's something here or not? And then we got these two very lovely ladies come back to us. There was Kim Whitten and Patricia Putt. And from there we had to spend a little bit of time figuring out, how do you even test a psychic? You can't just have someone sit down on the opposite a table, looking at somebody and asking them questions and talking to them, because we know that there are plenty of people who can use very basic magic skills to be able to get information out of people in those ways. So you start thinking about, how can you put little controls in place? How can you engage the scientific method to try and make it harder for people to knowingly or unknowingly cheat the system, knowingly or unknowingly use these little exploits just to appear like they've got abilities that they don't really have. So we said, can you get this information from people if you can't speak directly to them, if you can't ask them questions, if they can't answer you? Will that stop your ability to be psychic? And both ladies said, no, that's absolutely fine, we can do that. We said, okay, what about if you can't see the person? If they're behind a screen, would that affect you at all? And they both said, no, that's absolutely fine. Kim said, I read auras. Auras are very powerful things. They come wide, they go through screens. It'll be like the screen isn't even there. I don't need to say a word to them. I don't need to hear a word from them. I can just read their aura, whether the screen's there or not. And Patricia said, I talk to the dead, so I can talk to their dead relatives, whether there's a screen there or not. I mean, I assume she must mean that the dead people just kind of walk around the screen or something, but if she's in there in a room and there's nobody talking to her and she's just on the other side of a screen, their dead people can just still communicate. So she said, this is absolutely no impediment to my abilities at all. And then you have to start thinking sort of laterally about how you can test this, or what other ways that people can accidentally pick up information. So we had 5 people coming to sit down for a reading with each of these psychics. We had to make sure that the psychic hadn't seen any one of the people having readings. Because if you know that all the people are, say, under the age of 20, then you might bias your readings towards certain facts that might be true of someone who's 20, but not true of someone who's 50. We had to tell all of our participants, when you go in for a reading, you can't wear a strong perfume. If you're the one person who's wearing a strong perfume, maybe the psychic on the other side of the screen might be able to smell it and say, well, you like to take care of your appearance. You like to put time and effort into looking good. These kind of things matter to you. So these tiny little biases, or these little tiny facts, could creep in if somebody wanted to try and cheat the system and give them that extra little piece of information to make their reading more accurate for that one person, using means that aren't psychic. Now we have to cover all of the mirrors in the room to make sure they're not catching a glimpse out of the sitter at the corner of their eye. And it was a really sort of fascinating day. I mean, it was quite a boring day because it's quite a long time to sit while these ladies just sit in silence on the opposite side of a screen from someone who isn't talking for 20 minutes while they try and write down every single thing that they're getting from whatever means they can other than the 5 senses that we know about. Because then at the end of the day, you take those 5 readings and give them to each of the sitters and say, you should be able to identify, if this is real, this reading should read exactly like you and like nobody else, and you should be able to spot yourself in there. So it was quite an interesting day in that respect. But this was the basic of the psychic challenge. And these are the 2 ladies that we had volunteering for us. As it happens, there was meant to be a 3rd psychic who was involved in the test. There's a guy called Wayne Isaacs, this chap here. You can tell how psychic he is from that pause and this kind of stare and everything like that. These are classic signs of a psychic. And he's a chap who used to be on Psychic Live TV, which was an Irish TV channel. And every night he'd be on TV live, and he'd do a reading for someone. Essentially, you phone up and you get a reading live on TV, and everyone else can just watch it. It's kind of like Babe Station, but somehow more exploitative than that, really. And so this is what he does on TV every single night, and he'll tell you all about the person who's under the line, and about their future, and about their past, and all this kind of stuff would just come out because of his ability to connect with the dead. So I got in touch with Wayne and said, would you be up for this psychic challenge? He said, yes, I'd be really excited. Yeah, that should be fun, it should be great, I think it could be really interesting, I'll do it. And this process of designing the test took about 3 months back and forwards. Could you do it like this? Would this stop you? How about this? Is this fair? Because when you're designing a test, you want to be as fair as possible. Because you don't want the psychic to say, well, you forced me into doing it this way, and I could never do it that way, but I was just trying to make you happy because you've told me how this test works. So what you have to do is say, tell me how your powers work, and will your powers still work if we do this and this and this? And at all stages, you need them to agree on the test. So it took a very long time to get him to agree. And then literally a week before the challenge was meant to take place, I got an email from him saying he had to pull out. He said, Mike, I'm really sorry to let you down, but I can't do the psychic challenge because my spirit guide has told me that he refuses to cooperate with me on the challenge because he has foreseen that the challenge won't be televised, and so he refuses to take part, which is quite disappointing. And so I went back to him and said, look, Wayne, I'm really disappointed. I really am disappointed, but I'm mainly disappointed for you, because I can tell that you personally really wanted to do this challenge. So it must be so frustrating that your spirit guide won't let you, that your spirit guide won't play ball with you. That must be so annoying. The only other thing that's a bit annoying, I guess, is that your spirit guide, given that he routinely predicts the future every night on television, it's a shame that your spirit guide didn't realise this wouldn't be televised at any point during the 3 months we spent planning this. That would have saved us all a lot of time and effort. And I got a single response from Wayne Isaacs. I got a single line back from him that said, my spirit guide feels that 1 week is sufficient notice. So that's all I got out of his bureaucratic spirit guide. So he refused to take part in this challenge for that reason. That might be one of the reasons he refused to take part. There is possibly another reason why he wouldn't take part in the challenge. So about a month, I'd say, before the challenge, or a couple of weeks before the challenge, Wayne was live on television, as he does every night, and he gets this call from a guy called Will. And he's talking to Will, and Will's got an Irish accent, but apparently he's getting all this stuff out of Will about his upbringing and about his life. And despite his Irish accent, Will grew up in America, quite a rough part of America as well. He loved basketball because people, America's quite big into basketball. So every single night he played basketball. But then where he was a bit rough, and so one night he got in a fight, and then his mum got scared. So she moved him to live with his auntie and his uncle in Bel Air. And there's a moment live on television where Wayne Isaacs realises he spent the last 20 minutes doing a psychic reading for the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, the 90s TV show, the very fictional character, and all the colour drains out of Wayne Isaacs' face and says, are you Will Smith? And the guy's like, yeah, I am, yeah. And Wayne basically realises at that point that the game's up. So maybe that could be why he pulled out the challenge either. It's hard to know exactly why he pulled out the challenge. So in the end, we just went ahead with these 2 psychics, we spent the day with them, and at the end of the day, we got our 5 sitters together, and we give them all the different readings and say, can you identify yourself out of these different readings? And surprisingly enough, not one person could identify themselves out of the readings. I think out of all of them, there was one person who said, this reading's mine. Everyone else said, this one over here, and it wasn't there. So I think one of the psychics scored 1 out of 5, the other scored 0 out of 5. The psychic who got 0 out of 5 technically did worse than Chance. So technically she had an anti-psychic ability to make sure that nobody could ever recognise the correct reading. And so we went back to these ladies with their results, and it actually, when we published this, I'm surprised Wayne Isaacs didn't get in touch with his spirit guide to express his annoyance, because this got quite a lot of coverage, actually. We got, this was the article I wrote in The Guardian, first announcing that we were going to do this test and inviting people to take part. And then when we published the actual test itself and the results and point out that these two ladies failed, it made the Guardian, it made the Mail, it made the BBC. And it was actually one of the top 5 educational stories in the 2012 on the BBC, which is a really great kind of place to be able to have these kind of messages. And it's the reason I think this is useful is because it allows us to say that, first of all, we are willing to talk to people who say that they have these abilities. These abilities can be tested, but when you test them under controlled environments, they don't pass, they don't actually work, there's no legitimate effect here. So I think that's a very valid thing for us to be doing as we're testing psychics. And really, what was very, very interesting was telling these two ladies they didn't pass the test. And it was kind of heartbreaking in a way to tell them that, because they were very, very lovely women. I think they were completely sincere. I think they really believed that they had these abilities, and they were very, very surprised to find out that they hadn't passed. And I can understand why, because I think they really believed they were genuinely psychic. And if you asked these ladies anything about them, if you said, tell me one fact about yourself, they probably would have said, well, I'm psychic. Really the first thing they say about themselves. It's so core to their personality and who they see themselves as. Yeah. So this seems like being able to talk to the dead is just the most routine thing that they would do. But they've never tested it. They've never put it under controlled environment. They've never thought, how do I make sure this is really genuine? Because all they've ever done is say, this seems to be working, so how can I carry on making it work? Not how can I see if this doesn't work? How can I try and find out what the parameters of this are? And that really is the core of skeptical thinking, is when something appears to be working, don't ask the question, how do I keep this working? But ask the question, how do I break this? How do I find out if this is genuine? Because that's the question, really, that leads us to discovering whether there's something there or whether we're just fooling ourselves, as I think these ladies probably were. Thank you.